I'm Graham Swain. I'm with Nicola Whitley. Nicola, where do you work?
I work in our family law department.
Do you deal with all aspects of family law?
I specialise in domestic violence cases and I work very closely with victims and also with charities.
And by abuse, what sort of things can that cover?
Domestic abuse is a lot wider than most people realise. It's a very common misconception that domestic abuse is just physical. It's so many other things as well. It can be psychological, it can be emotional, it can be sexual, and it can be financial.
What can you do when there's been domestic violence?
A court can make protective orders called injunctions or normalization orders to stop abuse or violence taking place. The police can also help, but if the police fail to act, that's normally when we will get involved and we could apply to the court for protective orders.
What orders can the court make to help people?
They're called normalization orders. They're a type of injunction order which would prevent the other person from being violent or abusive towards that client. Once it's been served on the other party is when an order would be effective. That's something we'd arrange as well. So if we do get granted an order from a court, we'll arrange for it to be served on the other party so that it's effective as quickly as possible.
And if someone broke a court order, what would happen?
That's a criminal offence to breach a normalisation order, so the police will act. So when we serve an order on the other party, we make sure the police have a copy locally and centrally. So if there has been a breach and the police are called, they'll know that they can act on it straight away. Sometimes it can be resolved by the parties. There is an alternative called an undertaking, which is a promise that the other person gives to the court that they're not going to do certain things. We would never advise someone to accept an undertaking if it's not going to provide them with the adequate protection that they need.
What can you do when there's been domestic violence?
This is often the most difficult of circumstances for people. When they're living in the same house and they're suffering abuse, getting away is very difficult. They're often really worried about the children, unsettling them, keeping them in school, and also their possessions.
If someone comes to you and they're outside the home and maybe with their kids, what can you do?
If there are children involved, what we'd be looking to achieve and what the courts are looking at is to keep the children settled if that's going to be possible. So we would look at applying for an occupation order so that the person can remain in the house with the children to keep them settled and for the other person or the abuser to leave. It's a very strong order and the courts don't make these orders very quickly. And they need a lot of evidence and they need to be confident that it's not going to disrupt the other person as well. A really strong order would remove the perpetrator or the abuser from the property and allow the victim and their children and family to stay in the property to the exclusion of the perpetrator. In an emergency, if the victim needs protection now, sometimes it's safer to make an application without telling the abuser so that the order can be in place and they can be kept safe before the abuser has a chance to know what the application is.
Will legal aid just cover the injunction or does it go further?
It depends on the circumstances. Since the drastic cuts to legal aid, the requirements are very, very strict and specific evidence requirements have to be met in order to be eligible for legal aid outside of injunction matters.
How long does it take to get protection for someone?
Our knowledge and expertise does mean that we are able to give you the information very quickly and tell you what you need to provide, and we can provide you support whilst you're obtaining all this evidence. But it can hold things up in some cases. But if you're proactive about things and take advice quickly from an expert in one of our team, in our team here, that will probably help.
And if people reach an agreement, can you help with that?
At every stage, we do encourage people to sort out their differences if it's safe to do so. The courts are very keen on people resolving matters between themselves. It's always going to be better for the parties and any children involved if they reach an agreement that's theirs and not imposed by the court.
If you start these protection proceedings, can they be stopped?
Yeah, it depends very much on the individual circumstances, but there are ways to conclude proceedings without going through with further hearings. The courts are always trying to encourage dispute resolution where they can.
In your experience, what is the effect of abuse on people?
It's devastating. It's devastating for families, it's devastating for children, but action can be taken and it is very satisfying when you know you've taken someone out of a very difficult situation and helped them get on their feet again, get them set up in new accommodation through the help maybe with our housing team and start their lives again.